as our community grows, there's so many more people that want to contribute in certain ways, in a range of ways, that need support in certain ways. Um, but to be active in making change can also be a really powerful part of healing, can't it? That's why we're all here, isn't it? And and some people do need, counselling support or communities to connect with as part of their real kind of griefy work and healing process. But to offer opportunities do to do stuff, to be advocates, to tell stories, is also healing that some people really lean towards. And I think as our community grows, offering those opportunities to be involved is actually what a lot of people are starting to seek.
Welcome to the Full Stop Podcast with Sarah Lawrence, Berenice Smith and me, Michael Hughes. If this is your first time here, our podcast is centred around supporting the childless not by choice community, and our aim is to be a focal point for that community and with all our special guests show you how to manage your grief and give a voice to the issues specific to us. And by example, show that a full and happy life can be had without those children we dearly wanted. Now this episode, we get the chance to talk to Sarah Roberts and Judy Graham from Queensland in Australia about some groundbreaking work they are doing for our community. So let's see what it's all about. So welcome to the show, everyone. This episode, we have two Australians, Sarah Roberts and Judy Graham, who I know quite well, although I haven't met Judy yet. Anyway, that's another story for another time. One of the things I think that our community misses out on is all the great work that goes on around the world. So these two ladies have done some great work getting through to the Queensland government. So we thought we'd bring them on the show so that they can talk about their experience and talk about what they did so that those around the world can perhaps get some inspiration from that as well. So without me waffling on, let's meet Sarah and Judy. So Sarah, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm landing in 2022 and hoping that this year will be a little bit. We can venture out a little bit more, which would be good. Yes,
it will. So for the benefit of our listeners who aren't Aussies, who are you and what do you do?
That's a good question. I'm Sarah Roberts. I'm based in Brisbane, in Queensland, in Australia, and I am in voluntary childless. So I, as a young woman, always wanted to be a mother. It didn't happen, and I'm now crafting a life that's different from what I, had hoped for it to be. And as part of that, I've redirected some of my community and social work skills and counselling skills into founding the Empty Cradle, which is a service for women who are childless not by choice. And I just wanted to quickly, before we move any further, is just to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that Judy and I are calling in from. For me, that's the Yagara and Turrbal people of the Brisbane region. And I am the Yugambeh people of the Gold Coast region. So thank you. It's so lovely to be here.
Okay, Judy, it's your turn. Who are you? What do you do?
Well, firstly, thank you, Michael and Berenice and Sarah, for inviting us to speak with you on Full Stop Pod. I want to thank you for your time, and the work that you guys do to support and connect our community is so important and really valued. So I feel really honoured to be with you today. I identify also as a childless, not by choice woman. And for me, a range of circumstances led me to being childless. I think like so many of us who are childless, not by choice, our stories are very multi-layered. And, although I've spent time grieving and learning and studying and healing, I'm very much a work in progress. So I would say that I'm coming to you today from Gold Coast in Australia, and I'm a single woman who's childless in her early 50s. I live near the beach and with my lovely cat Sasha for company. And I feel really privileged also to have my own counselling practice where I work specifically with women who are childless not by choice. So yeah, my practice is called Womenhood, and the work is wonderful, and it's led me to meet some really wonderful people. The women that I work with, the people here today in the podcast, other members of our community, and I think also, you know, some of the connections that I've made with Jody Day and Karen at Gateway Women has been part of that, and I also feel really privileged to be a Gateway Women facilitator and to be, you know, have done that training with them and be licensed to facilitate Reignite weekend workshops, which is where I met Sarah Lawrence. We did that training together, which was wonderful. And also Sarah Roberts, who's here, is my wing woman, and so together we co-facilitate those workshops in Australia and New Zealand. So yeah, that's a bit about me.
You answered my
Thanks,
next
Judy.
question, which was how did the pair of you meet? Because clearly from your time, very short time so far with us, you're clearly very, very good friends. It's lovely to see your dynamics between you.
Thanks, Berenice. Yeah, Sarah and I have been working on a few different projects together, and I think it's been, you know, it was a wonderful surprise and gift to find each other, because, as you know, there's not many counsellors and therapists who work specifically with women who are childless or people in the childless community. Um, and so to find each other and to be able to support each other and kind of go, oh, wow, you've read that and you know about that, and to make this connection has been a really wonderful source of support. We have meetings together with to-do lists and things that, you know, we brainstorm ideas, and our meetings go on and on. We have to go, okay, enough for today, let's come back to that. Yeah.
It sounds like a podcast planning session. We have these admin meetings and really we try to do some admin. But yeah, it's a lovely thing to listen to, because I think that what's come out of just both of your introductions is that, you know, we go through an awful lot of pain. We know the pain, the pain might be different, but it's a shared pain. But from that comes some really beautiful and uplifting friendships and empowerment. And I think that's a wonderful thing to listen to. Just in this very short time, I'm thinking, yeah, go you, that's fabulous. It's very heartwarming.
Thank you.
So we asked Sarah and Judy to come along because they've actually been able to do something that I think a lot of people around the world want to do. As I know I'm preached to converted, but as childless people, you know, we feel unseen. And to make us seen, one of the things we need to do is actually get our government to actually recognise who we are. And Sarah and Judy have put some work into that, and that's what we want to hear today. It's, how you did that, how it came along, so that we can, again, as I said in the beginning, perhaps inspire others around the world to try it as well. So who would like to start about, well, what is it we're talking about? Because I'm not even going to try. You ladies will be much more eloquent than I. So what is it we're talking about, and what did you do? And then we'll go on from there.
We worked on, it was a submission that we put together. I think it was, I don't know, about 20 pages. That we put into for the Queensland Women's Strategy. So it was an area of government policy. And one of the focuses, what they were doing is they do often strategies are like 3 to 5 years where they'll go, okay, let's write a government policy document. And then that is often what funding's attached to, in terms of, you know, it's like a statement from government about their beliefs and what they're planning to do, all that sort of stuff. And so we wrote a submission, and the focus really of the women's strategy this time was really to look at stereotypes of women and how that impacts on their well-being. And so Judy and I did a bit of chatting about that, and the main stereotype we were concerned about was the idea that motherhood equals womanhood. And so what we did is we had a look at the strategy, but we also used it as an opportunity to build some links with the policy officers at the Queensland at the women's unit, and also just to really put the issue on the agenda and to really raise it in their awareness. I think one of the things that both Judy and I really focused on was really to kind of raise that visibility, but also to really ask questions to government to say, hey, this is, in some areas 20 to 25% of your adult population. How are they doing? Like, how are they faring? Do you have any idea across their lifespan what their specific issues are, what their concerns are, what their well-being is? And so what we did is we put together a paper that was really looking at really kind of going back to basics, to actually going, how well is the community doing? What do we know? What don't we know? What are some of the key questions? And then just framing it then in terms of some suggestions that we came up with, just some recommendations around for the Queensland government to consider in terms of responding to women in our community. Yeah, so that was kind of the idea of it, wasn't really, Judy? Yeah.
Absolutely. I think that was our agenda, wasn't it? To get childlessness on the agenda. And because it's not on the agenda in policy for women at the moment at all, certainly in Queensland or other Australian states. So Sarah actually had a conversation with someone who is working on the women's strategy, and to actually put voice and statistics to who we are as a community and what are some of those issues. And the woman in government hadn't really thought about that a lot and didn't have an idea about what was happening. So it just seemed like such a timely opportunity to put something, I think, not just to have the verbal conversation, but to put something in writing, which meant that we could follow it up. So we're not only starting a verbal conversation, but we had made a submission which, when the strategy comes out early this year, we can have a look and find ourselves or not, but have a platform to follow up and say, hey, we made the submission, what can we do? And are there opportunities to start talking to government about funding that might be required for support services and services that meet the needs of our community?
Wow. So you're really, what I hear is you're really holding them to account then. It's not just, have you thought about this? It's, here's the paper, here's the stats, and yes, we're going to be following up with you. That's incredible. How it feels like you've got a real, I don't know, some real power and some real oomph behind it, for want of a better word.
You sound very optimistic, Sarah, and we want to be that optimistic too. But I guess it feels like starting somewhere, doesn't it? Because we have conversations in our community, and our community is growing so much, and also I think there's lots of people who now we're finding each other and having a shared voice so that we can start to do some advocacy work. But when there's an actual strategy that's calling for submissions around, one of the specific topics was being inclusive and recognising diversity. So, it just seemed like such an opportunity to say we are here, and when it is a document that's written, we can follow that up. We may not have a lot of traction, but we have to start somewhere, don't we?
That's true. That was true. And it was actually, it was like a bit of a springboard, really. It was like an opportunity for us to, so both Judy and I have been doing you know, some academic work and training, both in counselling, but also my work's been in social work, which tends to be, it's counselling, but it also looks at the social context of people's experiences. So it's not just you as an individual. So a way of explaining that would be if you, for example, were working as a social worker with someone from, say, an Aboriginal background, you wouldn't just be looking at that person as an individual. You'd be looking at, okay, what is the context, the social context that impacts on your experience? And then to really work in terms of social policy. So some of our training in social work is around how to, you know, critique and respond around social policy. And, you know, one of the things that Judy and I were really aware of is that the research base for our experience is actually really quite unformed. And so that was one of the things that we requested, was actually to say, or, you know, that we recommended, was that the first thing we asked for was that the development of an issues paper, which was to say, hey, how are Queensland women who are childless, how are they faring? And what are their experiences and issues? And what are the research gaps? What don't we know? What are the unanswered questions? You know, for example, in Queensland, we don't have the data on, we know the numbers of women who are childless, but we don't know how many are by choice and how many are not by choice. So we haven't really tapped into that. We also haven't looked at, one of the other things that we asked for was to look at across the whole of government. So not just to look at our individual issue and experience, but to actually say, okay, how is, for example, the housing department, have you considered the needs of childless people? Or, you know, health, mental health, looking at aging, looking at those different areas of government policy, and to really consider how are childless people faring. The next thing that we asked for, which we felt was really important, was resources for a political voice, like an advocacy organisation or a political voice, to actually speak on behalf of and represent the childless community, and to actually, you know, give us a political voice within government policies and processes. And certainly there's lots of examples of this, where you've got, for example, disability advocacy organisations, you've got, you know, all those range of different social issues. There's organisations that receive funding and actually give that political voice and input. We also were concerned about looking at the psychological well-being and health of childless women across the lifespan. So really having a look at what are the points where women are really vulnerable, and obviously men as well, but to consider, you know, what are the support services and what's needed in terms of particularly women as they're grieving and they're coming to terms with childlessness. The next thing we asked for was around professional and workforce development, that I have a look at of the whole range of people, particularly within government services, to have a look at what are the skills that people are needing? What are the skills, for example, that counsellors and therapists are needing? How do we support them to actually work in a much more competent way with our community? The next area was then looking at workplace inclusiveness, and looking at, particularly in Queensland, we've got some really major, so there's a big public sector nursing sector, there's a big public sector teaching and education department. So the Queensland government's actually responsible for these workplaces that are so difficult for women to participate in, or for people who are childless to participate in. So to really consider what are the needs of workplaces, both within the Queensland government, but then also to consider across the broader workplaces in Queensland. And then the final thing we looked at, which is really based on, we've got a wonderful researcher here who's not related to Judy, but Melissa Graham, she's done 2 decades of work looking, and she's from the child-free space. That's where she kind of derived it from, but works a lot with both childless and child-free people, looking at social inclusion and looking at, so she's got really clear, evidence and has published a lot academically around the way in which people without children are socially excluded. And so we've looked at recommending either campaigns or ways in which we could actually look at destigmatizing campaigns, I guess, around. So they've done things like, for example, within, say, mental health or disability, or, for example, human rights campaigns, but really looking at how could we craft public awareness campaigns that are about, raising the profile and the issues and experiences for our community, and how do we build to be more inclusive and connected community where our needs are really considered. So that's kind of a summary, really, of what we spent quite a bit of time nutting that out, didn't we, Judy? Which was really cool.
Wow.
Not surprised.
That's amazing, because you think about kind of a few parts of it. So I'm involved with gender and diversity, and a little bit in the UK, and a very top level view in being part of a committee for this. And it's amazing how childlessness gets completely just knocked off that. It's not really considered to be an issue, but actually it is. But what comes across to me from what you've just said is that it's how this issue feeds into so many different things.
Yeah.
It's like a little, you think, okay, this is the state that we find ourselves in. But actually, like you said, the training, that's just one thing I can think of, that it must be universal. And I see it come up in a lot of our communities in Gateway Women, and some of the conversations that we've had with Katie when we were talking about equality in the workplace and that recognition, about how you make it inclusive to people who don't have children, whether that's by childless, not by choice, or by child-free, about being inclusive about that, and how people turn political language. There's a whole thing going on in the UK at the moment about the fuel crisis. Our fuel bills are going up, and one of the political parties here is talking about equality for families, and the use of the word family is kind of annoying a few people, because you kind of already know what that definition of family entails, but actually it does include us as our families too. But it's the language, it's so much, and your document, your paper feels like it's taken this word and this state, and you've really sat and thought, right, okay, it feeds into this, to this, to this, to this, to this, to this, and what are you going to do about it? I think it's incredible. That's absolutely amazing that you thought of that in such a wide-reaching way that perhaps maybe we as some of it, I mean, I personally, I'm sitting there just going, oh my God, because you forget sometimes, perhaps because we are perpetually in this state, we forget, or perhaps we maybe sometimes be dismissive or shy away perhaps from maybe the impact that other people have on our state of mind. We might be perhaps coming to terms with our grief, coming to terms with where we are, but often I find it's people on the outside that don't listen that actually set you back a bit, rather than perhaps ourselves, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it? Because we live our lives in a social context, and so when we are childless, it impacts on all areas of our life, and that's kind of a going outward, but it's also the coming inward from the social context into us, isn't it? And I guess, in the work that Sarah and I do in our counselling rooms, we hear these stories time and time again from women, and we know that men are part of this story too, but we know that these are the issues that impact on people's well-being, their workplace and their experience of that, and how they cope with those triggers and the inequity in those spaces, but how it impacts on relationships, on mental health, on how we see ourselves. So we live in a social context, and we need to address those social policies that impact on how we live.
So true.
I'm curious.
And I mean, I guess, sorry,
Go on, Sarah.
I guess the thing I would probably add to that is that we often have quite an ambivalent relationship in terms of government, and it can seem super daunting and quite intimidating to have a sense of impacting on change. But really, a lot of the work that we're suggesting is not necessarily work that's going to be resourced in other ways. Like either people volunteer to do the work, or it's about saying, hey, government, we really need some of those resources directed to our community in order to be able to do these really critical and important pieces of work. And that was the thing that was really helpful when we spoke to the head of the women's unit, is she said, look, you need to be really clear about what the issues are, but you also need to be really clear about what you're asking for. You need to be really specific to actually say, these are the list of, this is our list of demands, and to really to work on that, I guess. Yeah.
That's kind of brought me on to what I was going to ask. So what has the reception to it been like? Do you know? Have you been given any inkling about how it's landed?
Not yet. No,
Yeah.
I was looking up just the government website, and they're talking about the strategy being due around March, I think, this year. So they will have received a number of submissions from the regular players, the people that are already recognised in that agenda. So I guess we get to look to see what's been included in that strategy, and then we put our heads back together and go, what do we do? How do we respond? What do we do next?
Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll do some, as government winds back up, because January they're usually pretty quiet, is we'll reconnect with the personal contacts we've made. And it's like Judy said, it was when we spoke to the unit, they said, we've never even thought of this as a lens to even consider in terms of women's experiences. So women's experiences are often around, domestic violence, around race, around, sexism, around a whole range of, might be parenting. And so it was quite powerful even just to land that topic and that way of seeing, and to really, I guess, encourage women to speak up more in terms of, when there's opportunities to have our input, whatever the particular government policy or strategy might be. One of the things that she said to us, which was really helpful, is it doesn't have to be fully formed. Just tell us. It could just be a letter, just to say, hey, this is an issue, and just to have input, and this needs to be considered. It doesn't need to be this really well-crafted, in-depth piece of work. It's just about keeping that focus of getting that topic on the agenda, that experience on the agenda. Yeah.
It feels like it was well thought out, though. It doesn't feel like it was just a dear sir, have you thought about? It felt really well put together to me. I was sitting there going, wow, I hadn't even thought of that. So, I mean, it's amazing. But I know we don't know how it's landed, and you probably, as you say, you don't know until March. But where do you see this piece of work going, ideally? What do you want to get out of it in an ideal world, if they're listening?
All of those things we asked for in our ideal world.
All of it.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Do you want
I would say one of the most critical things, and we this was really of great value, was the I won't mention her name because I don't have her permission, but the woman that we liaised with, she gave us some really strategic advice in terms of some suggestions for how to frame it and how to put ideas together. And I would probably say the key thing is possibly the relationship. So what you're looking for is, who are the people that make these decisions? Who are the decision makers? How do I build a relationship with those people? And one of the things she said is she said, look, a piece of it will be in this strategy, but there's lots of other government policies where, we can suggest to you if there's the mental health policies being reviewed, or if the general health policy, or various different policies, that it might be really worth you having some input into those. And so I think the first one is really building that relationship and the connection. I think the second thing was probably also that opportunity for like Judy said, to take those stories from the counselling space, those individual stories, to link some connections together and to articulate the platform. Really, it was like putting together a little bit of an agenda and a platform. So that's probably the next thing. And, you know, hopefully there might be some funding opportunities for some little projects down the track, or we'll keep you posted. Yeah.
I mean, it would be wonderful if at a minimum we got an issues paper developed, potentially funded or in partnership with part of this policy unit that looks at women. So if an issues paper was published which tells the statistics and the stories, the real life stories of people, and brings that to life, that then that's also something that, again, it's published and we can take that to these other policy areas. You know, and it's also in publications, so it can be easily shared with, you know, others that want to do this work. But that would be a really wonderful starting place. And I think when we look to other areas of social change, that's often been a key, where you can go back to what are the issues, where are those documents, and who's been talking about this. So it starts to kind of create that a bit of a timeline and momentum that you can keep that dialogue, that relationship that Sarah's talking about, going back and forth between the players.
Mm. Mm. And I guess I'd probably say, I mean, I would agree, absolutely agree that issue papers would be really important. But certainly the really big issue, and I know that both Judy and Michael are, you know, really got your ear to the ground in terms of the childlessness community in Australia. And a really hot topic for us is around ageing. And so really having a think about, and so our state governments in Australia are responsible for delivering most of the social services. And so they deliver a lot of the aged care services, and they have the public guardian and the public trustee and all those, you know, health services. And I think that's a really hot button issue for us, is really around aging, but also having a broad-based childless not by choice advocacy voice at both the state, and we've also had discussions about, you know, developing something at a national level that really advocates for our community across the country. Really is what we're working towards.
Yeah, because one of the interesting things that came out of the conversation when we've talked about it in the past, Sarah and Judy, is that the thing that sticks in my mind is when you would advise that governments want to deal with organisations, they don't want to deal with individuals. And so, and for those who don't know, that's why Sarah, Judy, and myself and a few others are trying to get together to make a organisation in Australia that can be something that governments can talk to. Much more than that, but that interesting comment about governments want to talk to organisations. So again, for those around the world who are getting inspired by this conversation, that's a real useful nugget to think about too.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Yeah. And I think that's part of, you know, Sarah and I are probably how we clicked a little bit when we met, you know, our relationship, in that we've both worked our whole careers working in sort of health and community-based organisations. So we have a little bit of a sense of how the government funds community organisations and has that interaction around accountability for service delivery as well. And so that idea of having an organisation, it can be very much a grassroots organisation, but that can hold some accountability for interacting with government. And if there were funds available to do some research projects or to write these kind of papers, you have to have some kind of body. It can be as small or big as you like, but you have to have some kind of body for government to be able to work with in that way. So I guess it provides a little bit of structure.
I just wanted to let listeners know that episode 18 was about aging without children with Kirsty Woodard, who is part of the is a consultant on aging in the UK, and that might be something that listeners listening to this episode might be interested in going back to. It's episode 18 of the Full Stop podcast from August 2020. So some of that detail might have changed, I think, since then, and I'm sure that they're very, very interested in hearing about what you're doing there too. As you say, I think it is about collective bodies, isn't it, and being stronger together. It certainly applies, I think, in our government here too. So yeah.
The other thing, I guess, as well is that and you guys are an amazing example of this, is that the back of the work that's currently happening for us is it's on the back of volunteering. It's on the back of people who give up their time, whether it's evenings, weekends, that sort of stuff. The people who probably are resourced are people who are working maybe as counsellors and therapists in the space. And this is really about saying, hey, there need to be some publicly funded, dedicated roles that are really working to these issues and who are really able to progress this agenda for us. And to really really support the work that we're stepping up as a community and doing. But it's about, then there's more resources that are needed to really progress this work. Yeah, that's important.
And that's about sustainability as well, isn't it?
So true. Yeah.
To actually have a face, a place, a space in the community where those kind of services are visible. And again, it's that visibility stuff, isn't it? Which I think all of us have felt invisible, and that our issues have been invisible. So, this is so much about asking for visibility, asking to be seen, but almost, that demanding of services that are specific to meet the needs of childless people.
And respect as well. Isn't there something in that too? Being respected, being worthy of having an advocate within an official capacity.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
When you think about how many people, as you say, Judy, who are doing things, gosh, the people we've had on the podcast, all the guests, you two, maybe stuff. I suppose you can think about the three of us in a way. I'm the worst at imposter syndrome, but that kind of idea of that you're giving a voice to people and being listened to and being heard, but actually having somebody who actually offers a financial, I hate to talk about the money thing, but actually, okay, this is a person in an official capacity who's being paid to stand up and say, okay, this is what we need to do to represent this particular demographic. Because ultimately, when you're, we volunteer and we do all of these things behind the scenes, it can actually be quite exhausting to do that sometimes. And we all need that support too. And I was just thinking back to when you said you don't know how it's landed. And that's such a hard thing, isn't it? We felt that with the podcast. You produce an episode, it goes out. The very first one we did. And you think, did anyone actually listen to that? And it's a horrible vacuous state to be in, isn't it?
Yeah, very nice. And I get that it's so much like that when you take the first step in anything, isn't it? Your first podcast, it's sort of like, oh, what happened and who listened? But then you do the next one and the next one, and you start to build, don't you? And people start to talk to each other about the topic and, oh, have you listened to the podcast? It's like that in anything where you take those first steps. And I guess, advocacy work or getting noticed by government and policy change, you take the first step, but there's going to be more steps to come. It's not just one step.
No, it's not. And I think that, I don't know if you get this feeling, I hope that you do, that the paper that you have written is a springboard for so many other people out there in the community. I kind of get that sense from me sitting listening to you that it's an incredibly powerful piece of paper. I kind of hope that you realize that you could be onto something that is so incredibly, even at this particular point, okay, you don't know where it's landed, what's going to happen, but it's a galvanization. It's something that's part of, I think, a movement on a point where I think the world's changing in a very dramatic way, possibly because of the pandemic. I think people are starting to question those in charge in a way that I think hasn't happened before. But you've got something quite powerful here. I kind of hope you realize that at this point.
Oh, that's so kind. Thank you. And
One of the things I'd just like to say from a cheeky point of view is that throw Judy and Sarah some love through social media or something like that. Show them that you've listened to what's going on. Show them you're excited about what they've done. That will go a long way.
Thank you, Michael. And thanks, Berenice.
That's okay. I'm podcast listeners, well, anyone that knows me on Twitter, perhaps in my non-podcast identity, knows that I kind of get quite frustrated with being disempowered. That's not necessarily about childlessness, but I think that the state that we're currently, as of the recording of this episode in the UK, with the situation over our government having parties and such during lockdowns and other things that are coming to light, you can feel like you have absolutely no power at all. And there's a thing that I know from some training that I'm sure that you will all know already, but being probably the one that's not the counsellor, it's around the zone of control and what you can control and what you can't control. And I kind of think sometimes the podcasts and other things that you can do on social media, you think, okay, you're getting a little bit of control. You can get it out there and just write something down, and that can feel quite empowering. We've certainly found on the podcast that the episodes that we have around the authors and the writers, so where we've had Lorna Gibb and Annie Kirby, whose cover has just come out, by the way. If podcast listeners, go over to find Annie Kirby and you can find the Hollow Sea cover. I've pre-ordered it. I'm so excited for August. It's ridiculous. But she came on and talked about the starting of her writing career, and all about that writing and getting things out there, I think, is a very cathartic thing. And I just wanted to ask, in writing this paper, did you feel a sense of catharticness about it? Did it feel good? Did you feel like you had a little bit of control over something that maybe perhaps until now has felt a little bit, oh, it's just out there and you don't quite know where to put it? I don't know if there's any emotion like that around what you were doing.
I can talk to that a little bit, because quite a lot of the parts of the paper, because I'm doing a social work master's and looking primarily at involuntary childlessness. So I felt like I'd spent quite a few years squirreling away in a back room of a library, just surrounded by books. And it kind of felt like I kept on coming across stuff that this has to get out there, this has to get out there. And I know my experience was that what happened was I ended up being kind of so overwhelmed with content that Judy was amazing in that she came in and really worked on editing and structure and extending different ideas. And so it was just this really lovely collaborative process where we were kind of able to land. So things like, for example, I did a grief and loss subject where I really looked at what does the literature say are the losses and what does the literature say is the psychological impact. And so a section of the paper was able to really unpack some of that. So it felt good, certainly from my perspective, to be able to just go, let's put this out into the world so it can make change, it can make a difference. Do you know what I mean? Like it's not just about your own inquiry, it's where you get to put legs on it and actually start to see change. And I imagine similar feeling for all four of you in terms of the work that you guys do in this space.
I think study can be, I think it's an interesting point. You sit there with books, and I know from doing master's degree myself that it can be really isolating, can't it? You can just sit there and you take all this stuff on. And I can remember squeaking in the Cambridge University Library. So Cambridge University Library, it's not quite so kind of, well, actually, no, it's really quite posh. It's very, very academic, and it's very, very quiet. And I can remember finding something and kind of getting, oh, like this. And it was a particular thing that I don't think anyone had touched for a very long time. Got totally excited about it. I thought, what do I do with this thing? And my master's isn't around it's around graphic design and typography, so it's font nerdy. So I'm going off on one here with the font. It's ridiculous, isn't it? But it is quite an isolating experience until you actually get something out there and you've published it and you've done something with it until then. And it sounds like both of you have learned so much from each other in this exploration in this paper too.
Yeah, it's been
Absolutely,
amazing.
Berenice. Yeah, I think, Sarah and I both have different strengths and qualities that complement each other so well, which makes us a really good team. Um, and I think, the idea of printing this paper, having a written document, and the idea of picturing politicians, people, policymakers in a room reading it. Imagine if someone's reading this, that's
Yeah.
not that is in a position to kind of go, hey, have you thought about this? This is something we should look at. Just that idea is pretty amazing, isn't it? Um, that's the power of words and the power of writing, isn't it? That it's something set in time.
I just want to design it and make it go global and viral and everywhere, frankly. I'm just going to put it in some really cool typefaces and we get it going. Every single politician needs to read it, because why should they not read it?
We did a little bit of colour. Like we tried to make.
Oh, look!
We tried to make it look pretty. We didn't just do words.
I like it. It's a graphic design, you see.
We need to come back to you next paper.
We do.
I'm here. Do it. Let's do it. And I'll make sure that it goes. Because the thing is, it's a blueprint, isn't it? What you're doing, it feels to me like it's a blueprint that perhaps other people can contact you and say, look, actually, I've got this issue as well. Because, we've got another year, 2 years, I think it is. I forget, Sarah. I can't remember, but, our general election, the local elections, things coming up here too, and so much change going on. And if there is a change in government, there's an opportunity there that may happen.
Yeah. And it's worth, you literally can go in and make appointments and go and see certainly your local politicians, like the people that represent your area. As a constituent, you can go in and say, hey, these are our concerns. And, I think for Judy and I, this really feels like dipping our toe in the pond and the start of the conversation. Like we would love to, hear other people's input and what policy, ideas that people have in their local areas, and how, we can cross-fertilize each other's, advocacy voices and really support each other. One of the really interesting dilemmas that we really talked about was that when we talk about that 1 in 5, do we join together with people who are child-free and childless not by choice, or do we work separately but work more in coalition with each other? And I think where we landed was that certainly there's a lot of issues that we have in common in terms of social exclusion, in terms of a lot of other issues. But I guess we landed on that if there's going to be a table, that there needs to be 2 seats at the table, not just one. So that we didn't feel that we could speak to the child-free experience, but we also didn't feel confident that child-free people could speak to our story and our experience. So I think that was a big part of our decision-making in terms of how do we frame and what do we talk to in terms of the issues. And, there's going to be times when working together, particularly around things like aging and shared issues, are going to be really beneficial. But yeah, that was certainly one of the things that we grappled with in terms of thinking about who do we represent and what is the voice that we're putting into the public domain, I guess.
Sounds just incredibly powerful.
Well, I was just sitting there without how big your job is with the government and all the areas that you're getting into, and having 2 seats at the table and pulling it all together. I'm absolutely in awe of what you're doing at the moment. I think genuinely, this is going to galvanize other countries to go, do you know what, we need to do the same.
Be so exciting.
So I'm just wow.
Yeah. And you know what, I think as our community grows, there's so many more people that want to contribute in certain ways, in a range of ways, that need support in certain ways. Um, but to be active in making change can also be a really powerful part of healing, can't it? That's why we're all here, isn't it? And and some people do need, counselling support or communities to connect with as part of their real kind of griefy work and healing process. But to offer opportunities do to do stuff, to be advocates, to tell stories, is also healing that some people really lean towards. And I think as our community grows, offering those opportunities to be involved is actually what a lot of people are starting to seek. So how do we create those platforms that enable that?
Yeah, that's a really important point, isn't it? I think that we all might be comfortable, I think, talking about our journeys, but it's giving other people the opportunity to do the things that to speak about what they're comfortable about speaking about, whether that's anonymously or perhaps just a little tentative kind of, I've done the thing and I'd like to do that. I think it's a very big part of what we can do, I think, as being perhaps, I hate using that phrase. I'm going to have to come out with it because I can't think of another phrase, but community leaders, advocates, voices, whatever we want to call ourselves, can encourage other people to do that if they feel comfortable. But it's giving the opportunity and the space to do that. And also for those people to tell us, well, what does that look like? How can we do that for you? How can we create that space? And how can we provide that support for you? And we've always been encouraging, and we're very, very comfortable with other people doing podcasts, for example, although it comes with lots of warning bells. It takes longer than you think. It's bigger than you think, and it can grow. But again, if that's what people feel comfortable doing, then you support that too. But it's getting that direction, I think, from other people in our community, as you say. It's creating that space.
Yeah.
I guess the other thing that I might add to that is also the thing that I've found as I've worked across the community, and this is something that I think about in terms of my own journey, was I thought that once I was childless that it meant like I had to kind of, for me to have this really meaningful life without kids, I felt like I kind of had to really reinvent myself. And I thought, does that mean a new career? What does that actually mean? And I guess what I realized is that what I kind of did was I did a little bit of a pivot, but it was like I harvested a whole lot of skills that I already had developed, had grown as a professional woman. And I guess what I've really observed within the community is there's just such an incredible array of incredibly skilled people, and that's often one of the things that knocks us sideways. Is a lot of us have often developed skills and competence and abilities that we bring to the table, and childlessness just knocks us sideways in terms of our sense of competence and being able to to realize things in our lives. But I would really we've talked a lot about this, haven't we, Judy and Michael, is that you don't have to necessarily have a public role. There's a lot of stuff you can do on the back end. For example, having somebody who has really solid HR skills and can really work around how do we create workplace inclusion and diversity policies, or there's a whole bunch of different skills that people bring to the table. It could be, for example, somebody, the work that Judy and I have just done is really kind of working a little bit less with the politicians, but more working with the bureaucrats who develop the strategies, who make the funding decisions, who roll out who have actually a lot of impact in terms of how services get delivered. And it could be that there's somebody who's sitting in a bureaucracy who is listening to this very podcast and goes, look, I can't take a public role, but I would love to, for example, link with Sarah and Berenice in the UK and have a chat with you about how could we have input into government policy there. And so I would really encourage, even if you don't feel that you're somebody who could take a public role, and to really have a look at what are the ways that I might be able to really have an input and make change. Yeah, it doesn't have to be standing out there protesting with banners. There's a whole range of ways that we can do that, which is really valuable.
And I think whatever people think they might feel now, I think what you said about how childlessness can really throw us, perhaps, and you have to come to terms with that. The wonderful phrase that Judy has, which is living a life unexpected, is often about evolving, perhaps, as well. That what you might feel a year ago, even a week ago, a few days ago, you're constantly changing and evolving, and in perhaps coming to the healing, the sense of healing. I'm trying to get the words. My brain's kind of wants to say something and my mouth's not quite engaging. I haven't had enough tea this morning. But it's about that healing process. And something that occurred to me a couple of days ago in the goal setting thing I was talking about. And I'm thinking, yeah, I'm okay. And it brought up a couple of stuff, right? We're talking about kind of I was saying about people being your role models. And in fact, I had Stella Duffy is one of mine. It's one of my role models, because every time I listen to Stella, I'm like, yeah, I get that. That makes sense. But who was your kind of, it was a film, who would you be in a film? And I thought, well, actually today, this is the following day after I said, right, I've got the role models, I've got the soundtrack, I know what my goal is, this is what I'm doing. And the following day, someone said, well, if there was a person was in a film, who would they be? Your goal is a film. And I thought, well, actually right now, it feels like it would be Miss Havisham, running around mourning a life that she didn't have, because today I woke up feeling that I didn't feel like I had a voice. I felt frustrated, annoyed, and directionless by a life that I didn't have. It's not a linear process. We don't go from from grieving to counselling to getting, yeah, I'm better and I can talk about this stuff. Sometimes you cycle backwards again a little bit too, and that's okay. But sometimes talking about it and actually having new directions, new friends, because let's face it, none of us would know each other, I don't think, had we not have been through the journey we had. The podcast would not exist. And that would actually be quite sad. Your work, your paper would not exist if this had not happened. And that's quite a sobering thought, but also an empowering thought, I think, as well.
And it's that thing, isn't it, where, and I'm sure Judy will have a lot to say about this as well, is that sense of, I have to, it's almost like a myth of I have to have gotten over this before I can be contributing, or before I can be, living that meaningful life. Whereas it's, the two happen together. It's the grief coexists with, the reconstruction, the living, the forward looking.
It's a bit like how I look at our logo with the equalizers, and they're kind of equalizer things for sound, but often I look at them and think, well, are they representative of where we are in our journey, where they sit on the logo and the little bars, and is one higher and lower than the other because that's how we feel at the time, or maybe when we started the podcast, there's some kind of thing within that. Is that why we did that? And it's not, but actually there's a depth to that too, in the, we go up and down. And I know when we first started the podcast, we were in different states of healing. I know that none of us were better, none of us were healed, none of us felt that we got to the end of something when we started doing that podcast. And there's a phrase that I learned a couple of weeks ago, which was just launch the damn thing. And it actually is a website that I wish I had created, and I wish that I did the work that the lady owns the website does, and gosh, I want that URL. But it's true, launch the damn thing. It might not be perfect, it might not be 100%, but if it's 50% there, then there might well be somebody else that'll come out and go, yeah, okay, I can help you with that. And that might impact on somebody else who's feeling a little bit low, not quite in the right place, but actually they know they've got a skill that they had before this grief struck them that they could use and utilize. And then that becomes a movement of change. It might be very small, but it's 1% builds 1%, builds 1%, builds 1%. And, if you do 1% of change each day, then I think, over a course of a year, it's 37% of change. Something I read in a book that I've been reading at the moment on atomic habits, and how 1% of change, 1% of reading can make you change incrementally over the year, rather than thinking you've got to change the world overnight. That doesn't happen. It never happens, but incremental changes can make a difference.
And his stuff, that's James Clear, isn't it?
It is, yeah.
stuff's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I wasn't sure. I read some of these books and think, yeah, okay, but the cover design looked nice, which is always a good start with me.
Yeah.
Yeah, the cover looks nice. I quite like the typography and the interior
Yeah.
pages are well designed, and there's no widows and orphans. So I will read this thing. And actually, once I got over that bit, I found actually this is really, really interesting and really quite useful. I'm only halfway through, but I feel like it's something that could be quite powerful for lots of people. It's a book, yeah.
Yeah. And look, one of the things I love about James's way of conceptualizing this is he talks about, rather than, because he's very habit based, but rather than goal setting. So for example, we might, as childless people, go, my goal is to live this, you know, happy life, or this really good life or significant life, or whatever our goal might be. He talks about it being more about, rather than, for example, setting that goal, and an example you could use might be, for example, to lose weight, which might be to lose 40 pounds. He talks about it as being more embedded in your identity. So it's about, who is it that I want to be, and how do I embed that into my kind of everyday choices and habits of my life? So if, for example, I want to be someone who's fit and healthy, then it's like, what is it that somebody who's fit and healthy is doing? And to really gently allow yourself to kind of gently make choices and be that person. And I guess that kind of applies for us in terms of, rather than me having to kind of get over my grief and then I get to have to work on the life, it's like, what is somebody who's living a life, a life that's meaningful, who's childless? If that's what I want to be, what are the ways that I might be doing that in a really gentle way in my life now? And I guess one of the myths that I really want to bust is this idea of that everybody has to get over it and has to let go and get past it before they can start to create that in their lives. And I know for me, I live with chronic sorrow, which is a form of grief that, you're generally quite functional in the world, but it comes up and it needs to be tended to. And then it, you tend to it and it, you keep going, but that there's going to be more layers to it. And it's potentially going to be, for me, lifelong. I don't know. I haven't completely dismissed the idea that maybe at some point I'll get over it, but I also haven't dismissed the point that maybe I won't, and that I can actually live and create a meaningful life out of that, and while I'm experiencing that. And I'm sure you'd see that heaps in your practice, Judy, in terms of the women that you're working with.
And like you say, Sarah, it's kind of busting that myth and that perception that we have to get over something, or that we even can just get over something as big as the grief and loss that we experience as childless people. So, it's an unrealistic expectation, and it's that kind of perception that society can put on us, and that women that I work with all the time kind of experience that feeling of, I feel like I'm just expected to get over it, and therefore I have to get over it in order to get on with it. And it's just not true. So that process of actually kind of, like Berenice was talking about, the up and down, the going back and forth between feeling those losses and being in life and doing the things that actually restore us and help us feel that we are connecting with life and purpose. It's not one or the other. They can coexist. And I guess that's the part that we want to share with people more and more, and share ways of how to live that kind of life that we might desire with our loss there with us, but not overpowering everything. That we can have both. And it's a much more realistic and compassionate way, I think, to be with ourselves and with each other.
Yeah. I really get the sense that this is part of your healing then, this project, this massive piece of work. I mean, it's kind of, as you say, I don't think we get over it. I think it's a journey, isn't it? It's, even as a therapist, I never promise somebody that they're just going to get over it and then happy days, they're off it'll always be in our hearts, won't it? But that doesn't stop us building something important, making change, galvanizing other people. And I think what you've shown is that if you've got the will, the time, the dedication, you can actually put something together really meaningful and make that big change. But if you don't want to be that front, you know, that front of it, you don't want to be famous, you can sit in the background but still have that meaningful, purposeful life. You can be part of something bigger. And I think our community, you know, for our healing individually and as a community as a whole, we need these things, don't we, to be able to see that actually we have a right to be at the table, we have a right to be seen, and we need to be acknowledged. That's really what I take away from this episode. So I'm in absolute awe of the work that you're all doing. I think it is just so important that we're doing this. So thank you.
Thank you. And we're in awe of you. You guys have been just amazing. Just such a powerful voice for our community, and we're just so grateful.
Thank you. That means an awful lot.
You're going to make me cry.
Yeah, don't make Michael cry. He hasn't cried for about 3 episodes, so we're doing quite well so far.
No,
I think he's going to go for a hat trick.
I actually had a cry that a couple of weeks ago. We went for lunch with Sue Dowry, and we started talking about things, and we started talking about the podcast, and I can feel it coming now. But the testimonial page, I just sort of got tested, and that was it.
Oh.
Because you know, it's what we do is an important part of my life, and you know, talking with Judy and Sarah, you know, they're doing some great things, but like we've recognised, we don't all have to put that much effort in, but together as a community, we can make, you know, we can change the world. That's what I believe.
Yeah.
And
together we're stronger.
Yeah.
We are.
Yeah.
You know, that's you know, that's like with the Aussie group we're trying to get together. You know, we realise that it's not just one person; it's going to be a number of people that are going to make this work.
And you know, I remember when we had that big discussion about do we make it childless or child-free, or just childless, and I remember, I think where we landed was actually saying, hey, if we're having a bad day, it'd be so nice to be part of a group and an organisation where we don't have to explain ourselves. If we're feeling vulnerable, if we just need to have a little cry or just step back and go, that's just too much for me now, I'm just needing a little bit of space, that we're surrounded by people who hold it and who just get it, and that's okay. Yeah.
No, definitely. And just to change it onto a different tact, Judy Graham is now putting all her time into the childless space as well, just like Sarah does, and just like you do, Sarah Lawrence, as well. And I think Berenice must do, because she's making up hours out of nothing to do both her work and then the podcast.
To be fair, I mostly just look at fonts, Michael. I look at a font and go, oh, nice. Yeah, anyway, but yes.
Judy, yeah, I'd just like to congratulate Judy on going full-time with womanhood as well.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael.
Congratulations, Judy. That's amazing.
Congrats. It's amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, it feels like another step. You know, we've been talking about taking these little steps that move you in a direction, and yeah, I started Womenhood 18 months ago part-time, while I was also providing other supportive care for an organisation. But I love the work. You know, I really do meet wonderful people, and it feels like all the skills and training that I've done in my life experience to date have kind of really come together and support me to provide this service to women in our community. And it feels like the right timing, and I've got the capacity to be able to offer this service full time. So yeah, I feel so pleased that I can actually just put all my energy into that, and I'm not thinking about other stuff, you know, for half of my week. So it means that I have a lot more capacity to think about this stuff, to have these meetings with Sarah where we conjure up ideas and work and also provide the counselling support to women across Australia. So thank you very much.
No, I think it's important for us to recognise what's, what is the whole part of this episode was to recognise what's going on in our community, and the podcast can be that vehicle to let people know, because it can be so inspirational, and you working full time with Womanhood now, and Sarah full time with the Empty Cradle. These are the things we need to celebrate. We need to talk about, so that it can inspire and give comfort to our community as well, to know that there's all this going on.
Yeah. And Sarah Lawrence, you've done an amazing job of bringing together a network of therapists across the globe. So which Judy and I find really supportive for our work as well, which is amazing.
Oh, it's been a big old love-in today.
I was going to say, we just need a big group hug, don't we? I feel like I need to be.
We do.
Need this big
Across
group
the
hug thing
continents.
going on.
We do.
I think it's exactly what people need right now. I was writing the newsletter for the January episode last night and a little bit this morning. And I was thinking, I started it sort of, well, actually, a peaceful new year is what we're wishing people, in that, because it feels like it's going to be another complex year. But Happy New Year seems very strange thing to say in the circumstances, and sometimes, well, I think every time when we do an episode we need to have a collective bit of a love in, because we love the listeners, we love our community so very much, and goodness knows we wouldn't be anywhere where we are today without the people that are behind us. So massive thank you to everyone that supported all of us here on our journey as well. That's a good place to end it, don't you?
Yeah,
it's beautiful.
Well, thank you to Sarah and Judy for coming
Thank you so very much. It's been absolutely lovely. I feel very empowered, and I want to go out and I actually do want to go out and do some placards, I have to say. They'll be beautifully designed placards, but I feel like I'm in a space of placards at the moment.
And that's the end of the episode. Now, please don't forget to go over to Sarah and Judy's social media pages and show them some love, because they are doing some great things. Now, you can find Judy at Womanhood and Sarah at the Empty Cradle. Please reach out to us if you have a burning topic that we have not covered, or you might want some more info on the content of this episode, or you may even have an idea that we have never thought about. So please reach out to us, and you can find all our contact details at www.fullstoppod.com. And as always, it's important for us to let you know you are not alone.
Yeah.
Right, enough of the loving. This has been wonderful.
It was such a touchy-feely, you're amazing episode, so are you.
Like, shucks.
Get away with it.
I'll go on you.
I'm your biggest fan.
No, I think it's been really refreshing, this episode, actually. Don't you think?